And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
I'll do my best not to fall asleep during this video. I'm talking about Monuments, Wonders of Antiquity from Mayfair Games, and really, I've come to the conclusion that if someone's going to make a game about the wonders of the ancient world, that it's going to be completely boring. Basically, after looking at the cards, after looking at the board of this game, I look at it all, and it seems like they made a mishmash of mechanics, threw them together into a box, and then threw this theme on it. And sometimes I can tolerate that if everything comes together in a very interesting way, but that doesn't happen in this game. It's a rummy-style game, but just doesn't really cut it for me. But let's take a look at the game itself. Here we can see the board for the game, and the board is really nothing more than just a score-keeping chart in a sense. It's really basically a card game. Players are going to have these cards here, and on each player's turn, they have a few different options that they can take. Basically, they can take a monument turn, or they can take a historian turn. Now, if they take a monument turn, they get 3 actions that they can take, and they can take a 4th action if they get rid of 2 cards from their hand that have the same symbol. For example, you can see here that these 2 cards have a scroll symbol on them, so you would be able to discard both of those to take a 4th action. Now, when taking these actions, there are a few actions that you can take. One, you can draw a card, and I call it Ticket to Ride style because that's the game that we use it in the most, where you can take a card that's face up, or you can take a card from the top of the deck. However, if you take a card that's face up, the card from the top of the deck is not put there until the end of your turn. So you can draw cards for one or more of your actions. Another action you do is build a monument. If you're the first player to build a monument, each monument is a different color with different symbols in the corners. And the first person to build it simply needs to put 2 cards down from their hand of that monument. If someone else wants to build that monument, they do the same thing, but they have to put down at least 3 cards to build these monuments. And then as another action, players later on can expand a monument by adding more of that color on top of it. So later on, if I draw another Petra card, I could play it here and continue to expand this monument. And then the final thing that you can do as one of your actions is score victory points. Let's say I have these 2 monuments here in front of me. I'm allowed to discard 2 cards from my hand, let's say these cards here, with the same symbol on it. See how both of these have a helmet symbol on? And then I would score points equal to the number of helmets in my display. So if we look at my display with my 2 monuments here, you'll see that there's 3 helmets total there, and so I would get 3 points. So those are what you can do on your action turns. The other thing you can do, instead of taking 3 actions, is a historian turn. A historian turn works thusly. If you have a historian token available, and depending on how many players, depends on how many you get, but usually you have 3 of them, you can deploy historian basically, and you look at all of your opponent's displays with however many monuments they might have. Your monuments mean nothing at this point. So let's say you play the historian and I'm your opponent, then I would have to lose the top card from each of these monuments, and your historian would get 2 points, basically, at the end of the game. He's done a history of 2 cards. But of course, if you're playing more than one opponent, you'll be able to pull these off of all the different players, and usually you'll score 4, 5, 6 different cards. If a monument only has 1 card left, that card does not come off. For each card that does come off, that color is moved 1 space on the track. What's the point of that? Because at the end of the game, if you look here at the scoring, depending on how far it is on the track, shows how many victory points the player who has the largest monument of that type gets and the player who has the second largest gets. Now, there's a good possibility that players will be tied at the end of the game, and so let's say, for example, I have a yellow monument and you have a yellow monument, then the number itself on the monument is what's going to matter. So, for example, these 2 monuments, one of them is a 9, the other is a 2, and so the 9 would win the tie at the end. However, if there was one with 2 cards and one with 1, the 2-card one would beat the 1 card. That's basically the extent of the game. You're scoring points by discarding cards as actions, but most of the points are scored by building these monuments and having these monuments be worth a lot of points at the end of the game. The game basically comes with a reference card for each player, and this tells you what you can do on your turns in case you forget. It's not really that difficult, though. There's a few things you might forget, like you might forget you can discard 2 of the save to get that 4th action. How many times is that worth it? But the game kind of has a backwards mechanic in the sense that when you score your historian, which will get you points, and whoever scores the largest historian will get more points at the end of the game as a bonus, you're going to get points each time you pull an opponent's card off. So by pulling their card off, you're making, Petra, in this instance, Petra go up in value, but at the same time, if you don't have Petra yourself, it's not worth it. So there's kind of a back and forth trying to figure out who owns what monuments. By taking their cards away, you're helping your historian, but you're also helping their monuments increase in value. Now, if you have a Petra monument yourself, then this is a great thing. But it just seemed a bunch of backwards decisions, in a sense, trying to figure out exactly what was the right thing to do. You're probably getting at this point that I'm not a big fan of the game, and I'm not. I like the theme of the Wonders of the World. I like the pictures on the cards. I like seeing Petra and the Mausoleum and the Colossus of Rhodes and the Zeus, the Temple of Zeus and Babylon and the Colosseum. I mean, they're enjoyable pictures, but I never felt like I was building anything. I felt nothing. And the idea of the historian, it felt like a game of chicken in a sense, because if you don't score your historians by the end of the game, you lose 12 points, a huge amount of points. But at the same time, you don't want to score just a few points with them. I don't know. I just felt like there was something lacking. The 2-player game, both players control 2 different players, which is kind of confusing because you got to remember which color you're controlling at any one time. And I don't know. The game works, but if you like Rummy, just play Rummy or play one of the Mystery Rummy variants. If you like strategy games, there's games that seem to have more strategy than this. This game might be clever in some regards, but it just isn't that much fun. And if a game isn't fun, I don't want to play it.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.